As many of you know, Erik and Lyle Menendez have served over 30 years behind bars for the brutal murders of their parents. And over the decades, public perception seems to have changed on them, viewing them now as victims, which they were, as well as murderers. Their father did awful things, and the mother apparently knew about it and did nothing to stop it. And as many of you also know, the Los Angeles County District Attorney Jorge Gascon recommended that the brothers be released. That was just a recommendation that needed to be signed off by a judge. We were supposed to find out what was going to happen now, this month, but unfortunately, that judge asked for more time, and now we're going to have to wait until early 2025, towards the end of January. And since that recommendation from the DA, he lost an election and a new district attorney has been sworn in Los Angeles. And Nathan Hochman has a lot to say about Erik and Lyle. A lot that his supporters are not going to want to hear. The brothers are currently represented by Mark Garagos, an attorney who, with his law firm, is representing them pro bono, meaning not charging them. And they are taking various courses of action to try and get them released. One of them is asking for a retrial because they claim some important pieces of information were not considered during the two initial trials back in the 90s. One piece of information was a letter that was sent to a cousin detailing the alleged abuse. Another new piece of information that also was not discussed in the original two trials in the 90s was the fairly recent confession by a former member of Menudo that their father, who was a big music executive, did awful things to that boy bander when he was a minor. However, the new district attorney is adamant that the Menendez brothers did receive a fair trial and that their testimony of being taken advantage of by their dad was heard and considered. In a new interview with Deadline, Nathan Hochman, the new LA County DA, says, quote, "It's a bit simplistic to say that society back in the 90s didn't recognize SA of young boys or men. I think it did. I think there's plenty of cases that this office and offices across the state were bringing to the courts." According to Hochman, Mark Garagos, the Menendez brothers' attorney, has, quote, "been very happy to repeat that mantra. And the media has repeated Mr. Garagos' mantra. What I'm saying is that whether or not the mantra is actually true is that no one's actually looked, that I'm aware, to see what types of cases, in the volume of cases that were brought where the victims were young boys or young men. They make it seem like it never happened. I know for a fact it did." Hochman says that there's an assumption that during the second trial, the SA allegations were not raised. But he says that Erik Menendez testified for 7 days about the alleged abuse. Says Hochman, quote, "Probably, if I had to guess, close to 40 hours of testimony where he went into great detail, as he did in the first trial. Incident by incident, between the ages, I think, of about 6 to 18, of what his father had done to him. So the notion, again, the mantra that sexual abuse wasn't explored in the second trial, that the judge kept out all the evidence, actually isn't true. Quote, "I've been doing this for 34 years. I've seen it. The media is in search of simple narratives, conflicting narratives, and so it adopted the Garagos narrative, which was very smart, very creative. It's basically that the trial was all about SA, that their response was because of sexual abuse. It's that a conviction was only attained because the evidence of SA didn't occur in the second trial, but occurred in the first trial, and therefore that the underlying conviction is wrong and should be fixed. Knowing the Garagos narrative is absolutely wrong, the issues that we'll be looking at for the trial will be whether or not these two young men faced an immediate threat to their life. Why they got to that point, how they got to that point is irrelevant for the trial. For the convictions, maybe not irrelevant. Hochman said he now has access to the confidential files as well as the court transcripts. Quote, "We're looking through the testimony as opposed to the highlights of testimony that people have been happy to share." Quote, "We're going to go through all that evidence and weigh all the factors and ultimately come to the judge and say to the judge, here's all the records, here are your options, and make sure that whatever decision is ultimately made is the best informed decision possible." So the good news is ultimately it will be in the hands of the judge, but if the DA is recommending to the judge not to resentence, not to have a new trial, that could weigh heavily on the judge, and the judge might decide to agree with the new district attorney. That next hearing is scheduled for January the 30th. What do you think will happen there? I do think that they will be released. I think. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer, but I think so. They've served enough time. They were, very young at the time of the murders, and we shall see. Thoughts? Let me know in the comments section.